Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Research Education Adoption of Solar Energy Technologies. I want to thank Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, Chairman Lamson, and Ranking Member Inglis for holding this hearing on solar energy this morning. Solar energy offers one of the best solutions to the greatest challenges facing our nation: global warming, dependence on foreign oil, and concerns about American competitiveness. It has tremendous potential across the United States, especially in regions like southern Arizona, where we have over 300 days of sunshine every single year. Solar energy, as we all know, is a nonpartisan issue. The sun beats down on Republicans and Democrats and independents with equal intensity, and we can all benefit from harnessing the power of the sun. This stimulates business development, it creates new jobs, helps protect our environment, and promotes energy independence. My legislation, entitled the Solar Energy Research and Advancement Act of 2007, will move solar energy forward by targeting some of the gaps that several experts have identified in our national solar energy strategy. Today, we're going to hear from experts on the discussion draft that was earlier circulated. This is a great first step in the overall solar energy agenda for the 110th Congress. I'm considering other pieces of legislation, and I know that other House committees are looking at solar-related bills as well. As we move forward, the cumulative efforts to focus on the use of solar energy should be very positive. Let me briefly summarize the four components of this bill. The first component would establish a thermal energy storage research and development program within the Department of Energy. This will help us solve perhaps the most significant problem with concentrated solar power technology, energy storage. We need more advanced technology so that we can store solar energy produced during the day and use it at night or on a cloudy day. This is all about energy reliability and viability. We need to assure the public that they will have enough electricity when the sun goes down and when they need it. The second component would require DOE to conduct 2 concentrating solar power commercial application studies. One would study methods to integrate concentrated solar power energy into regional electricity transmission systems. The best time of the day to produce and use solar energy is from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. We need to research how to connect the major solar power plants to the electric grid, relieve expensive demand on electric utilities, and use solar energy during these peak hours. It also makes sense to examine how to bring electricity from high solar resource areas like Arizona and Nevada to other parts of the United States that have other energy needs as well. The other study would require DOE to inform Congress on methods to reduce the amount of water consumed by concentrating solar power systems. CSP has its greatest potential in the southwest United States, and like all power plants, it requires tremendous use of water. Given the strain on water resources already in this region, we must research ways to reduce water consumption so that we can realize the benefits of CSP technology. The third component of the legislation will authorize a competitive grant program at DOE to create and strengthen solar industry workforce training and internship programs in installation, operation, and maintenance of solar energy products. The goal of this program is to ensure that adequate supply of well-trained individuals to support the expansion of the solar energy industry. If we want to increase our use of solar energy, we have to make sure that we have a trained and qualified workforce. This section will promote job growth in a fast-growing solar industry. Lastly, we've got beef for dinner and we've all got milk, but who's gone solar? The fourth component of this bill would create a Solar Energy Industries Research and Commercial Application Board to plan and coordinate projects of research and commercial application, certification, information, and other purposes of benefits to the application of solar technologies and educate people on why we need to be doing this. This public-private partnership will also help the general public understand how they can benefit from solar energy technology. I want to note that this program will be paid for by the solar industry and will cost the taxpayer absolutely nothing. It's important to my constituents, all the other people's constituents as well. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass this important legislation. The chair now recognizes the ranking member from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis, for an opening statement.
And I thank the chair for holding this legislative hearing on facilitating the adoption of solar energy technologies. Solar energy occupies just a sliver of the global energy market. However, when you consider that the Earth receives more energy from the sun in just 1 hour than the world uses in a whole year, it makes sense that we should look into making that thin sliver into a big piece of the energy pie. With some advancements in technology and conversion efficiencies, solar will fit the bill for our energy goals: clean, renewable, and abundant. Today we're going to discuss draft legislation that seeks to address ways that the federal government can help speed commercial viability of solar energy. I look forward to hearing from our expert panel of witnesses as to how we might meet our goals. Madam Chairman, as we discuss these proposals today and move to markup, I hope we give adequate time to make this bill as good as it can be. America's scientists, engineers, inventors, and entrepreneurs realize the potential of solar power and other renewable sources, and I hope we can set policies that facilitate the development, the best development of those sources. Thank you again for holding the hearing, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel of witnesses. With some Arizona connections, I'd just also like to point out, always bring it back to Arizona. We have Mr. Hayden, who is Solar Technology Coordinator for Arizona Public Service Corporation. Mr. Rhone Resch is the president of the Solar Energy Industries Association. Ms. Jane Weissman is executive director of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council and the vice chair of the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. I just have to mention that Ms. Weissman earlier talked about 1991 at the Westward Look Hotel in Tucson, where a lot of this work actually began. So I think that's pretty interesting. We also have Professor Joseph Sarubbi, who is the chair of the Building Systems Technology Department at Hudson Valley Community College, and Mr. Daniel Arvizu, who is the director of the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory and originally from Douglas, Arizona. So that is very cool. So as our witnesses should know, spoken testimony we'd like to try to limit to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes to ask questions. And as far as I know, we're okay on time in terms of for votes. So no particular pressure here to speed through this. But let's get going with Mr. Hayden, please.
I need to control this thing myself, huh? Okay. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Herbert T Hayden. I'm the Solar Technology Coordinator for Arizona Public Service Company, APS, in Arizona. Thank you for the opportunity to testify to you today regarding concentrating solar power, or CSP. CSP is a technology of great interest to APS for its potential to provide lower cost and more reliable solar power in the desert Southwest. I'd like to submit my written comments to you and briefly summarize them now on the main points, which are, number one, the importance of thermal energy storage to the viability of concentrating solar power. Number two, the importance of reduction of water use to the viability of concentrating solar power. And number three, how a study to integrate concentrating solar power plants with the electric grid can facilitate the commercialization and implementation of large-scale CSP. APS is the largest and longest-serving electric power utility in Arizona, the fastest-growing state in the nation. We are adding customers at 3 times the national average, and electricity demand is growing at 4 times the national average. To meet this rapid growth in electricity demand, Arizona's electric utilities are investing over $2 billion a year in infrastructure. Plans for the future include conventional generation, new transmission and distribution, and an increased focus on conservation and cost-effective renewable energy resources. In Arizona, our most abundant renewable resource is sunshine. For the past 15 years, my responsibility has been to work with the solar industry and researchers around the United States and the world to bring lower cost and reliable solar electricity to our customers. From a technology perspective, our primary focus has been on technologies that can be lower cost on a utility scale in the near term. As early as 1995, the APS Star Center was a test site for dish drilling systems and for the advancement of concentrating PV systems, both of which are forms of concentrating solar power. Based on inquiries from companies around the world, it seems clear that our work has helped stimulate the growing interest in concentrating solar power technology. One of the most successful CSP technologies to date are the solar trough systems that use solar heat to drive turbine engines and generators. For more than a decade, solar trough plants in California have been the largest collection of solar power in the world, and they have operated well. CSP is currently the most cost-effective solar technology for large-scale use and has the potential to compete with conventional generation in the near to mid-term. Because of this potential, last year APS completed the first solar trough plant in the U.S. in over 14 years, the 1 megawatt APS Saguaro Solar Trough Plant near Tucson, Arizona. Our intent of that project was to help reestablish and again advance the U.S. solar trough technology. In short order, the APS plant was followed by a much larger project in Nevada, which has benefited from the new solar collector design experience gained in the APS project. An important attribute of the CSP systems is the ability to incorporate thermal storage into the design to improve the reliability of power output. This is an extremely important feature that many intermittent renewable resources such as PV and wind do not have. All renewables have value for the ability to help reduce the use of fossil fuels, but the ability to store the thermal energy for times when it's needed provides for a reliability that does not exist with intermittent resources. This is especially critical to utilities because they have the obligation to provide reliable power at all times. It's commonly considered that solar provides power when it's needed the most during the daytime. This is largely true, but there are fluctuations due to clouds and a roll-off of solar before the late day hours of high power consumption. For example, power consumption in Arizona reaches at peak in the months of July, August, and September, and the summer heat results in heavy air conditioning loads. During that period, Arizonans use the most energy between 5 and 7 p.m. when they go home, increase air conditioning, and do things for their lives. But unfortunately, the solar resource peaks sometime in the mid-afternoon and tails off significantly as the sun lowers on the horizon. Thermal storage has the potential to bridge the gap between maximum solar generation and peak customer demand by extending the hours of operation sufficiently to cover much of the evening demand. There's already been some support in the national labs for the development of thermal storage concept, and we recognize and appreciate that past support. However, the resources are apparently limited in comparison to the substantial expense of a meaningful development and test plant. Certainly, a dedicated research and development program on thermal storage could significantly accelerate the use of this promising technology. Another key area for improvement of CSP is water use. The current design of large CSP plants use water simply for cooling the power plant in the same way that water is used for conventional power plant cooling. Though CSP technology has been successful with its current water cooling approaches, growth in the desert has placed ever-increasing demands on water use, and reductions in water use would increase the attractiveness of CSP. On the third topic relating to CSP, of the study of integrating large CSP plants into the regional and national electric grid, it's true that planning for CSP does raise numerous issues, including the availability of land use issues such as water and permitting, and increasingly the availability of transmission facilities and transmission capacity to deliver the energy to load centers from the areas where solar might be developed. Transmission is generally constrained in much of the West, and significant new transmission investment is needed in the coming years for all types of generation, renewable or conventional. The southwestern states and utilities, including APS, are considering the needs and benefits for transmission to ensure a robust grid to meet the needs of the West's rapidly growing population. A federal study of the potential for the integration of CSP into the transmission plans would be timely and supportive of the further commercial implementation of CSP and could help address the same kind of issues that have been encountered in the successful growth of the wind industry. So finally, we're currently leading a group of southwestern utilities in the exploration of a 250 megawatt CSP plant to be built in the Southwest. In the process, we run into these issues: transmission, water, etc. Also, land on federal land could be considered. So finally, I'd just say that we believe, APS believes, that large-scale CSP has very good potential to provide cost-effective energy to the United States. We also believe that the U.S. industries have still been a leader in concentrating technologies and have the opportunity to benefit by that. And finally, that CSP can be improved with the addition of thermal storage and with reduction of water use and the proper integration of CSP into national grids. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and the members of the committee for the opportunity to share these observations with you, and I would be available to answer questions if I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. Mr. Resch, please.
Thank you, Chairman Lamson, Congresswoman Giffords, and the member of the subcommittee for providing me the opportunity to testify on these important issues this morning. My name is Rhone Resch. I'm president of the Solar Energy Industry Association, a trade group here in Washington that represents over 500 companies and over 20,000 people employed in the U.S. solar energy industry, including hundreds of small businesses throughout the United States. I'd like to thank the committee and its staff for providing true leadership in advancing solar energy in the U.S. A key element of leadership is providing the opportunity to empower others to lead. And today you seek to empower individual Americans to strengthen our energy independence, to become high-tech workers, adopters, and advocates for solar technologies that can help meet America's energy challenges in the 21st century. With regard to the establishment of a checkoff program for solar, I'd like to convey 3 points. First, the highest priority for the solar energy industry is the creation of a long-term incentive for solar to help lower costs and provide a clear market signal to manufacturers to actually expand production. Only then will we have a supply to meet the demand of an educated market, and only then will a checkoff program succeed. Second, solar energy technologies provide significant energy security, environmental, and economic benefits to the American public and must be a significant part of our energy portfolio going forward. And third, the solar industry would greatly benefit from the creation of a federal checkoff program, just as dozens of other U.S. industries have benefited from these programs. While solar prices have dropped by 90% in the last 25 years, solar is still 2 to 3 times as expensive as the national retail electricity rates. Furthermore, the U.S. has been eclipsed by Germany, Japan, and China in the manufacturing and use of solar. Incredibly, Germany installs 8 times the amount of solar each year as the United States, despite having the same amount of sunlight as Anchorage, Alaska, as you can see from this map here. When you do look at that map, you can see that the U.S. really does have world-class solar resources in all 50 states. And certainly, if you can make solar work well in Germany, you can make it work well in all 50 states in the U.S. But Germany enjoys market leadership because its government has enacted long-term incentive policies that have jump-started the installation market. Congress is currently considering legislation to extend the federal solar investment tax credits for homeowners and businesses, H.R. 550, the Securing America's Energy Independence Act. Specifically, these bills will create an 8-year extension and expansion of the ITC for commercial systems and an 8-year extension and expansion for residential systems. I want to commend Chairman Gordon, Subcommittee Ranking Member Inglis, Congresswoman Giffords, Congressman Udall, Congressman Baird, Congressman Bartlett, Congressman McCall for co-sponsoring this important legislation, without which a checkoff program would not galvanize in the United States. We need to have this policy support in place to make the domestic industry competitive in the global marketplace for solar technologies, and I respectfully request that the committee reach out to Chairman Rangel of the Ways and Means Committee and ask him to support the provisions in H.R. 550 in the tax title of the energy bill, which will be marked up tomorrow. Solar energy is the nation's most abundant energy resource, and it can greatly improve the U.S.'s ability to have a secure and reliable energy supply. Solar requires no fuel to operate, and our panels are warranted to last for 20 to 25 years, and you'll see a panel be put up here in just a minute. And this is one of the things to point out. Once you buy and install a solar system on your house, it's like buying a car with all the gas you'll need for it for its entire lifetime. Sure, it has more of a cost up front, but it will hedge the consumer against rising energy prices in the future. And on a community scale, solar can help stabilize volatile electricity prices and relieve tight markets for natural gas by reducing demand during midday peak, when the most expensive, least efficient generation is used. Moreover, solar is the cleanest method of electricity generation. Electricity from solar produces no air pollution, no water pollution, no noise pollution, no radiation, no solid waste, has no impact on wildlife, except maybe inconveniencing the squirrels that are running around on your roof, and uses no water for generating electricity, an increasingly important issue for the fast-growing communities of Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, California, and Colorado, as Herb just pointed out. As we begin to tackle climate change in a real manner, keep in mind that over the 40 to 50-year life of a solar electric system, every kilowatt of solar electric power reduces 217,000 pounds of CO2. Finally, as today's hearings demonstrate, there are tremendous economic benefits to be gained from increasing our use of solar energy. Solar photovoltaics creates 32 jobs per megawatt, more than any other form of energy. Solar could provide more than tens of thousands of new jobs in the coming decade in manufacturing, engineering, construction, and installation, investing America's energy dollars in America's workers. Yes, if we are to begin harnessing this potential, we must significantly increase consumer education and awareness of solar technologies. While the public strongly supports the increased use of solar, market research shows a broad gap in the understanding that solar electricity operates just like regular electricity, and that solar can work anywhere in the United States. Many outdated misconceptions exist that the technology must be overcome in order for consumers' use to increase of solar. As you can see, this is a solar electric panel. Most people still think that solar looks like the technology on Skylab, checkerboard pattern, inefficient use. This is a company in the United States. It looks like a flat screen TV. It's the most efficient panel made in the world, 22% efficient, absolutely gorgeous. I actually put it up on my house last year. Generates about 85% of my electricity right here in Washington, D.C. It's very exciting. But consumers lack the information on how to find solar companies and what solar products might be available. And most solar installation companies are small businesses, typically employing no more than a few dozen people and lacking the budget to reach a broad swath of consumers. So in short, the solar industry needs to launch a national awareness campaign, and numerous other industries have provided us with a blueprint to do so. Congressionally created checkoff programs have served as the backbone of many industries' successful promotion campaigns. Mr. Chairman, I'm sure we are all familiar with the dairy industry's Got Milk, the cotton industry's Cotton, the Fabric of Our Lives, and the National Pork Board's Pork, the Other White Meat. But, Mr. Chairman, no pork was involved in the creation of these campaigns, at least no congressional pork. Rather, these industries pooled their resources through a comprehensive program to fund consumer education. A Got Solar program, if you will, would provide major benefits to the American public. Consumers would be able to obtain market information on product and company quality and become educated about local and national energy use patterns. Meanwhile, local solar installers would benefit from broad public outreach that they would otherwise be unable to afford and see the resultant growth in their business. To be clear, consumer awareness is only one major obstacle to the widespread use of solar, and a checkoff program can only work if we have proper market incentives and market mechanisms in place. I want to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weissman, please.
Madam Chair, Chairman Lamson, members of the committee and staff, I'm very encouraged to be here this morning, and I really thank you for the opportunity. This is a perfect time to be talking about training and building a confident and strong workforce for solar energy. Solar electric installations grew by over 40% in 2006. If we meet the goals of the photovoltaic industry roadmap, direct employment will increase from 20,000 now to 62,000 in 2015. By the U.S. Department of Energy's own estimates, as many as 5,000 trained installers may be needed to accomplish their new Solar America initiative. Many recent and well-documented reports and research show continued and robust investment and growth for the solar energy market. But as the market grows, so does the need for quality and accessible training opportunities for these new green-collar jobs. The good news is that the framework is in place to give us the tools we need to develop a strong workforce. NABCEP, the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, offers professional credentials for renewable energy installers. Since 2003, NABCEP has certified 365 solar electric installers from 40 states. NABCEP certifications are based on strict psychometric guidelines and credentialing principles. The process is rigorous. For the applicant, it requires documenting experience and passing a 4-hour exam. NABCEP's competency standard sends a clear message to consumers and public officials that the industry stresses safe and ethical business practices and high-quality workmanship standards. The bar has been raised for professional services in the solar industry. While NABCEP certifies the installer, IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, accredits the training programs and certifies the instructors. Credentials are awarded using standards developed by the Institute for Sustainable Power. These standards ensure legitimacy of what's being taught and by whom. A system of review and audit provide a means to compare content, quality, and resources across a broad range of training. We see promising trends for new practitioner programs. Community colleges, as my colleague Joe Sarubbi will talk about, and technical schools are offering renewable energy courses. These range from standalone courses, new energy certificates, and associate degree programs. Classes are expanding from 3 to 5 day workshops to semester-long courses. The committee asked me 3 questions. Question number 1, is there a sufficient number of people trained? As market performance continues to grow, the number of current training opportunities fall far short of meeting the demand for qualified workers. We need more classroom and hands-on training tailored to meet local labor needs. Alliances need to be developed and advisory committees established between training centers and local business. Curriculum needs to include real-world preparation with field and on-the-roof internships. Question 2, are such programs necessary or useful? The current training programs are a start at providing a critical service that supports a strong and growing solar industry. However, their reach is limited and training opportunities need to be broadened. We must make sure that training programs are teaching students the right skills to do a good job, that the facilities include the right equipment and hardware, that safe practices are utilized, and that teachers are qualified. While many states support workshops and training programs, New York provides a national model for us. Installer training is a top priority for NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. To date, NYSERDA has invested nearly $1 million to develop 7 accredited solar training centers across the state. NYSERDA's program is one to emulate and replicate as it serves as a proven model for future training programs. And question 3, how can the quality of training programs be ensured? Training needs to be based on industry standards so that students are taught the right skills with the right equipment. We recommend the following. Training should lead to defined workplace knowledge, skills, and abilities. Training should address issues of safety, codes, and core competencies of an industry-approved task or job analysis. Training should be in an environment with appropriate facilities, tools, and safe practices. Training should offer a formal and planned learning structure where the learner receives some sort of feedback and their progress is monitored, and training programs and learning objectives should be assessed and receive independent approval or accreditation. We have the foundation in place for training and developing a strong workforce. NABCEP's third-party certification programs are a means for consumers to identify qualified workers. NABCEP has set industry standards high. Now we need to provide the training to meet these standards. Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity. Members of the committee, thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sarubbi, please.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, it is certainly an honor and a pleasure for me to appear before you today to discuss the value of training programs for the installation and maintenance of photovoltaic systems. I truly believe the timing is right for our country to invest in renewable energy technologies. We are witnessing a renaissance in thinking about the way we generate and use energy in America, and solar power is a key component of this new mindset. As we continue to embrace solar power, we need a well-trained workforce to be responsive to this fast-growing industry to ensure success. And our country has the educational infrastructure at the post-secondary level capable of creating a skilled workforce in photovoltaic installation and maintenance. At the forefront of this training are community colleges. With the right resources, I've witnessed firsthand the ability of community colleges to quickly take action and develop credit and non-credit courses, certificate programs, as well as associate's degrees to develop a skilled workforce in myriad occupations. Hudson Valley Community College can certainly be viewed as a case study for developing a successful solar energy training program. We've gained national and international recognition for our PV installers programs and our training facilities. Our success was based on 3 variables. First, a government agency such as the New York State Research and Development Authority, who provided the funding stream through grant opportunities, as well as tremendous guidance to help ensure success. along with other organizations, such as the Interstate Renewable Energy Council and the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, who are guiding us towards accreditation. The second variable is collaborating with local certified PV companies with the expertise to recommend the best equipment for training, advice on curriculum, and on-the-job training for our students. And third, well-trained faculty to deliver high-quality education. Now, we weren't sure what was going to happen when we started this process, but to steal the baseball analogy, build it and they will come, certainly held true for our solar training programs. Once the word got out, interest came quickly and is growing fast in many ways. From PV companies expressing interest in hiring our students, from individuals interested in gaining the solar training, from homeowners seeking information about having solar systems installed, and from other schools interested in learning from our success. There has been tremendous synergy surrounding the development of our solar training program. So much so that Hudson Valley Community College hosted the first ever national conference for educators and trainers on renewable energy training and energy efficiency workforce education. And that happened last November, with educators and school administrators from over 30 states and 6 countries. We had somebody come from Australia who was interested in seeing what we were doing. It was tremendously successful, and we are hosting a second conference in March 2008. And I share that because great things have come out of us starting a training program in the solar industry. Members of the community now have another career path. Solar companies are happy because they can expand their services as more and more homeowners clamor for solar power, all leading to job growth and economic development. Furthermore, our success has opened the door to develop wonderful partnerships with local solar installation companies as well as large solar manufacturing companies such as SunPower, who uses our facilities for training. And they're a California-based company, and they come to Troy, New York to utilize our facilities. In closing, I can't emphasize enough the importance of solar, certified solar training programs in ensuring the continued growth of the solar industry. It is a critical cog in the wheel of success. Without sound training programs, that wheel might keep rolling for a while, but it will break down. I ask the members of this committee to please consider supporting this exciting bill, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my thoughts on this. And I'll certainly entertain questions afterwards.
Sarubbi. Mr. Arvizu.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for this opportunity to discuss important issues related to the nation's energy policies to meet our future energy needs. I'm the director of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, and NREL, as we call it, is the U.S. Department of Energy's primary laboratory for research and development of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. I'm honored to be here to speak with you today. I might note, as I preface my remarks, that I started in the solar business more than 30 years ago as a young engineer working on solar power towers, concentrating solar power at Sandia National Laboratories, and we've come a long way in that time. I applaud the committee for its continuing examination of solar and other resources of renewable electricity and fuels. If we are to ensure the nation receive the full range of benefits from renewable energy technologies, we need to carefully balance and blend new technology, market acceptance, and government policies. It is not a question of whether to rely on the market or on the research or on the government action. As we work together, we need to solve our energy problems by deploying all of these things simultaneously. DOE's Solar Energy Research Program supports development and deployment of solar energy technologies and systems that can help meet our nation's electricity needs and reduce stress on our electricity infrastructure. The solar program supports research at NREL as well as other institutions in photovoltaics, concentrating solar power, solar heating, and lighting. Through the President's Solar America Initiative, the SEIA, the nation's goal is to reduce the cost of solar photovoltaic technologies so they become cost competitive and effective with other sources of electricity in all major U.S. markets by the year 2015. Although the bulk of the U.S. national program is focused on photovoltaics, I'll focus my remarks today, oral remarks that is, on concentrating solar power, CSP, since that is really the topic of the discussion draft. It's primarily addressing where CSP fits into the overall portfolio. Recent developments in the western U.S. Illustrate the growing concern over greenhouse gas emissions. Consequently, a market climate is opening up that is furthering the encouragement to deploy concentrating solar power, certainly in the U.S. Southwest. In the U.S., 9 CSP power plants totaling 354 megawatts have been operating reliably in California for the past 16 years. And there seems to be, we seem to be poised for some growth. These plants are especially interesting because with the addition of thermal storage, they are ideally suited to meet peak demands of energy use in the Southwest. Until recently, however, this CSP technology has been stagnant. And as with all new energy technologies, cost is the issue. CSP has had additional challenges in that this technology requires scale to achieve its ultimate cost effectiveness. Couple the scale issue with high upfront capital costs, and what you have is a pretty high investment risk that really is difficult in the traditional marketplace. In 2003, the solar program at the Department of Energy addressed this cost issue by commissioning a detailed technical analysis of what this technology could produce, and it was reviewed subsequently by the National Academies, and I participated on that panel. The cost of CSP at that point was concluded that even though at that time it was around 12 to 14 cents a kilowatt hour, that it could ultimately be down in the 6 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And we believe that today even those costs could be exceeded. The discussion draft language on thermal energy storage addresses an important issue related to the intermittent nature of solar energy and its impact on utilities. And the potential for low-cost and efficient thermal storage is one of the key long-term attributes of large-scale CSP technologies. The ability of CSP technologies to store energy presents an opportunity for DOE and NREL to establish an R&D effort that focuses on solar technologies that can produce base load power at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and these systems could include storage of up to 17 hours that would compete for firm power from coal power plants, especially when they are outfitted with carbon sequestration technology. So it's expected that an aggressive R&D program could achieve these cost goals by the year 2020. The discussion draft also addresses transmission integration. And an important issue for CSP is that CSP is best when the sun is most intense and you have cloudless days, as we do in the sunny Southwest. So plants are often located in desert or semi-arid locations where very few people live. Transmission lines are required to bring that power from remote locations to the urban load centers. Throughout the West, access to transmission is generally limited because many lines operate at or near capacity. With transmission, while transmission is a problem, it is particularly difficult for solar because solar power plants need to be located where the solar resource is, and they are not always have close access to existing transmission lines. Addition of transmission lines would allow solar energies from the Southwest to provide a very significant fraction of the overall total electricity needs of the country. So early market penetration of CSP could be driven by a long-term extension of 30% investment tax credits for commercial solar technologies. But if the cost of CSP power is too high when the tax credits expire, the market will be significantly impacted because there will be a downturn in that technology. An objective of our program is to see that the Department of Energy's CSP R&D activities would be to decrease the cost of the technology in a timely fashion so the market remains healthy when tax credits might expire. The Solar America initiative the department has doubled the effort to accelerate the deployment of photovoltaics in the marketplace. And earlier this year, 12 technology pathway partnership projects were selected to receive up to $168 million over the next 3 years, and the awardees contributing over 50% of the funding. The new portfolio continues our historic investment in thin films and increases support significantly for concentrating photovoltaics and silicon technologies. In summary, to address our near-term needs in solar power, we need a national strategy that promotes deployment of solar systems and processes that are ready to serve us today. At the same time, to address our longer-term needs and achieve a truly significant contribution from solar power technologies, we must make a new major commitment to the research required to deliver the next and subsequent generations of concentrating solar power, photovoltaics, and other new technologies. We also need to invest in the infrastructure and in the workforce required to promote sustainable businesses and job creation. The good news is the U.S. can take back the global leadership that it once had in the solar energy field. What is likely to be one of the most important new industries of the century is solar energy. They're investing wisely now and in the future. The timing is fortuitous because by most accounts, the next big major market for global renewable energy use is here in the United States. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your opening remarks. We have a good amount of members here, so I want to get going pretty quickly. Let's try to limit question and answers to 5 minutes and see how far we get. I'd like to kick off with some of the comments Mr. Resch made in terms of what we can be doing as a country in comparison to Germany. What happened in Germany, and you know, and for the panel, you know, what can we learn from them? You know, what are the takeaways? What are some of the mistakes and the pitfalls?
Thank you, Congresswoman. What Germany did first and foremost was to make a long-term investment in solar energy. And they did it during the worst economic downturn since World War II. So what they basically said is we need to diversify our energy portfolio. We are becoming increasingly dependent upon natural gas coming from Russia. And they felt it was very important to look at what natural resources they did have in place. And certainly solar, although their resources are lower than ours, was one of those resources. And they looked at all renewables, including wind and geothermal and biomass. They created a structure which is a 20-year incentive structure to encourage the use of renewables. It's called a feed-in tariff, or the EEG is the acronym in Germany. And what it does is provide, again, a fixed incentive over a long period of time. It doesn't really relate or translate, if you will, to the United States because of our electricity laws are very different. But the most important thing that they did was to give a long-term incentive structure. Now, what's happened is manufacturing has expanded rapidly in Germany, and they've created almost 40,000 new jobs in Germany in the last 5 years because of the EEG. These are manufacturing jobs in eastern Germany, a lot of installation jobs. You're seeing solar go up on barns, on homes, on factories, really all over the country. And they've gone from being a country that ignored, if you will, solar to being the global leader. They install 8 times as much PV as we do each year. They install about 80,000 solar water heating systems each year. In the United States, we install about 6,000 solar water heating systems. And because of that, they've really created an economic force and growth in Germany that, frankly, hasn't been seen since the high-tech, frankly, the chip industry. So this is a classic example. The U.S. technology invented in the United States being commercialized by the Germans and the Japanese and increasingly the Chinese. So what they've done provided a long-term incentive and structure for encouraging people to use solar.
Thank you. How would the proposed solar research and promotion program, or the Checkoff Program, enable the industry to promote the use of solar power in a way that it currently cannot? And why is the involvement of the Department of Energy for this program so useful? Your opinion?
The Checkoff Program really does several things. First, and perhaps most important, is it allows all of the industry to collectively pool its resources together. So when you look at all of the individual companies that are out there, they just don't have the budgets, if you will, to do a national campaign on their own or even a branding or marketing campaign. But the beautiful thing about a Checkoff Program, it's a very, very small surcharge that then collectively and certainly over time creates a pool of money that then can be used for education and outreach. The second is really the public perception on solar. When you do the polling and you ask people what do they think of solar, they want to see more solar. They want to use more solar. My gosh, you inventory, you ask anybody in this audience behind me, I guarantee half the people would say, or more, would say, I want to put solar on my house at some point in the future. But they need to figure out how to do that. We need to have a mechanism that allows consumers to learn more about solar, to learn this is what solar looks like. It's a beautiful thing. It's elegant technology that it has incredible environmental benefits, that although the cost may be high up front in the long run, it does pay for itself over time and can be a good hedge against, let's just say, higher energy prices. So that type of mechanism needs to be pulled together. And what we've found is that programs like Got Milk and the pork program and cattlemen's programs have worked. They've worked effectively for agriculture in industries that, again, are diverse, that have literally thousands of small farmers, or that have hundreds of major agricultural providers, but that collectively, when they pool the resources, can get something done. I think the Department of Energy becomes a critical entity because it allows let's just say, the government input and coordination on research and public perception. And so what we would want to make sure is anything that we're doing with this program is operating in a very consistent manner with the Solar America initiative and research and development programs that are going on in the DOE, in large part to make sure that there's no duplication and that the federal resources are used as effectively as possible, but also to get the insight from the researchers around the country into this program.
Thank you. So the chair now recognizes Ranking Member Hall. Thank you for being here. And
thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. And thanks for a good panel here. And Ron, good to see you again. You're too young, but
that's changing quickly, sir.
I think you're going to be a fast learner. And I like your natural gas background. Mr. Hayden, in your testimony, you have advocated a study on locating large-scale concentrated solar power on federal land. And you point out that a single 250-megawatt facility would occupy 1,250 to 2,500 contiguous acres of land. Now, with the hard cold facts being that the proposed drilling area for ANWR is 2,000 acres, I believe that's the correct figure, with the potential for recovering over 10 billion barrels of oil, a possible 50% increase in total U.S. proven reserves, creating roughly 1 million jobs here in the United States. And my question is, can a solar installation produce this much of a return on the same amount of land or more?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question.
Did you write the question? You didn't send me the question for you to knock it out of the park, did you? I really want a good answer.
You asked the question in terms of, I think, productivity of the land use.
Yes.
And obviously, we all understand that that's a very complex topic to look at productivity of land use, and so I think there would be a very imperfect comparison between an ANWR drilling site and a solar site. In fact, if we look at what the challenges are to making solar actually competitive, just on pure costs, we are challenged in the sense that nature has put together the fossil fuel resources into a highly dense form, and extracting it with, resource extraction may not have a large footprint, but in the counterbalance, the land use of the solar does not deplete the resource. It's working in real time to harvest sunlight. Secondly, there's a ripple effect where the technology is advanced into bringing the solar into play. So I would agree with you that if you look at the footprint alone as one metric, that competing against fossil fuel in a highly dense form is very challenging for any renewable. But if you look at how fossil fuel over its entire life cycle of being replaced could compete with solar, then solar now has an advantage because the technology is very efficient in terms of, say, nominally 25% conversion of sunlight into energy, where fossil fuel has a much lower efficiency on its entire basis. So all these things are, of course, arguable in how you look at it, but the solar technology does have the opportunity to deliver forever. And
they could exist and be compatible together.
I think that is a very important point. We've seen in my work of trying to combine mining uses, for example, where they have buffer zone and land with productive uses of solar.
With us being so totally dependent upon people that really don't trust us and we don't trust, sitting here with the fear that China will offer them a buck a barrel more than we're paying them. Do you like the comparison when they say don't disturb the little ANWR, the pristine little area of ANWR when it's 19 million acres and we're using 2,000? Did you hear the comparison that it'd be like putting a postage stamp at the end of a tennis court and saying that ruined the whole tennis court? The good combination of the two with solar would be the same. It doesn't hurt the land at all.
Well, I'm not sure that Alaska would be a great place for the solar equipment. It would generate pretty good during half the year and not so good during the other half of the year. But I think there is a lot of opportunity for hybrid composite uses of land.
So you make another point there. If it's dark half the year, what are they hiding up there? Anyway. I have one other question of Dr. Arvizu. On the the neutrality on Department of Energy on checkoffs, and are there any other checkoff programs at DOE? Should there be a generic renewable checkoff program? And is that a good use of DOE resources? I just give you the full barrel.
Thank you. Actually, there are merits to what I believe are intended in terms of the value that checkoff programs bring. I think the rationale for the Department of Energy is what is the role of the department and how should it endorse or otherwise encourage what we think are very, very appropriate education programs. And I think Mr. Resch actually articulated very nicely the benefits and the value that educating the public has in terms of promoting the use of renewable energy. The question is still, I think, an open one inside the department as to whether or not the department has, a role that couldn't be satisfied by perhaps closer coordination with the private sector. One of the things we're trying to do at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is connect very closely with the industry and with the private sector to make sure that our goals and objectives are aligned and that these public-private partnerships provide as much benefit both to the taxpayer as well as to the private sector. In the end, this is about making investments. This is about having return on those investments, putting market signals where the value is extracted, and that we've got a lot of work to do in those particular areas. So the checkoff program, although it's important, isn't the highest priority that we're working on, but we see the merit and the value of it and open for discussion as to what role.
My time's up. If I had more time, I'd ask you if being open, if you mean they're going to remain neutral on checkoff, and question, why shouldn't DOE be focused on research? And I may write you a letter and ask you those things. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And let me also note that in this draft legislation, no money would come directly from DOE from the checkoff. It would all come from the private sector, and it would be voluntary. Chair recognizes Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. And I just want to say that I'm very excited about the future of solar, and I applaud you for the bill. It's a nicely crafted bill. The real limitation for solar, you've talked about education. Education is a limiting factor, but the real limitation is the price. I come from the wind industry, and what happens in that industry is that as we get up the manufacturing curve, the cost goes down just out of production volume. But I'm not convinced that's the case with solar, especially with photovoltaic. So my question, I guess, for Dr. Arvizu is, do you see the technology leading in photovoltaic and in CSP leading to lower costs with increasing volume? Or are we against some sort of technical limitation that's going to prevent the cost from coming down? And if not, could you kind of go into that a little bit for me?
Yeah, sure, and I know that Mr. Resch has something else to say as well. I would offer that the incentive programs that have been put in place, both in Germany and in Japan, have demonstrated very clearly that with these policy measures and incentives and encouraging a market which now has exponential growth does in fact reduce the cost. And what we're seeing is that the costs are coming down, things like balance of system costs, inverters and installation costs and things that relate to siting and installation are all, in fact, now a much smaller fraction of the overall system costs than they used to be. So it does inform our research programs because I think there is plenty of space and opportunity to reduce costs both on the what I call the business end of the technology, which has to do with the conversion process from solar to electricity. And whether that's at the cell level for crystalline silicon technology or at the module level when it's thin film technology, we see tremendous progress being made there, and it is a matter of a lot more volume, a lot of learning curves. Clearly, First-generation technology is on an S-curve, if you're familiar with how technology finds its way into the marketplace, and you probably need to jump on to second-generation technology, which is a different S-curve with different learning curves.
Would you say, I mean, we're past second-generation technology with solar photovoltaic now, aren't we?
Not in the parlance that we use. First-generation technology is the technology I started with in the 1980s, and it is what is it's the staple. I sponsored this research literally in 1985 with Dick Swanson at Stanford University. It's now commercial product. Technology that we're working on in the laboratory now is what we call second generation, thin films, concentrating a variety of high efficiency technologies. There's yet a third generation that's the organic, really high efficiency. I call it revolutionary. It's maybe a few years down the road, but we're right now trying to get second generation into the marketplace. So there is a lot of room to be had, and I think what you'll find is many of these companies are investing in second generation technology today.
And Congressman, if I could just add a couple of points in response. We have seen historically the price of solar come down. So when the incentives for solar were dropped in 1983, the market continued. I mean, dropped, but we continued to use solar energy. And since 1983, we've seen the price of photovoltaics come down by 90%. The learning curve that we've seen is for every doubling of manufacturing capacity, we see about a 20% reduction in the price of photovoltaics. So what is really needed is a long-term, stable driver for the market so that if I'm a manufacturer, I'm going to scale up my production. I mean, most of the manufacturing facilities are 20, 30, 40 megawatt plants. That's pretty small. We need gigawatt scale plants, and the only way you're going to get that is by providing a long enough incentive so that you can make sure your investment in that plant is actually returned. And the example I use for wind, I think we're probably a decade behind wind. Wind has had the production tax credit, granted on and off, but they've had the production tax credit for 14 years. Solar has had the investment tax credit for about 17 months. So, the market really is just starting in the United States with respect to any kind of market incentives coming from the federal government. So we're hopeful we'll see a long-term incentive that will spur manufacturing and then drive down costs here.
So, in when the tax credits had a big impact, the initial tax credits were investment tax credits, and it caused a lot of substandard equipment to be put in the field, and it kind of hurt the industry's reputation for years and years. What sort of tax incentive do you think to be the most effective for solar then, given that history?
Because solar tends to be distributed generation and having a very high upfront cost, we found that the investment tax credit works best. At the end of the day, the investment tax credit isn't large enough for you to put in expensive non-operating equipment. Everything is UL listed. Everything comes with certification. Everything has to be grid connected, and with the investment tax credit, it still has to pay for itself in a reasonable period of time. So we're seeing the commercial segment of the marketplace, so think of Lowe's, think of Home Depot, Freshfield stores, putting solar up on their roofs where you've got an energy manager and you've got an accountant watching to make sure the system performs. Very sophisticated equipment that is performing, so the ITC works best for us.
So basically what you've just said is that the investment tax credit is probably more effective than production tax credits for solar.
That's correct. The production tax credit is... The bottom line is yes, the ITC works better than the PTC.
Thanks for your honesty there. I'm out of time.
Mr. Inglis.
Following up on Mr. McNair's questions there, which would be more effective, some kind of tax credit or a net metering kind of proposal?
You really need both. Net metering allows a system to work effectively. So just to give you an example, on a day like today, even though I'm using air conditioning at my house, I'm generating excess electricity. If Jane was living next door to me, it would be going into her house, and it would be going into Hal's house as well. And what that does is it really stabilizes the grid. It allows utilities, if you will, although they're going to still buy peak demand, to have less congestion, less constraint on the distribution grid.
It also makes it much more attractive to me to put in a system, right? Because
and you wouldn't have to buy a battery backup system that would store, so it actually is a lower cost. Your grid connect. You almost use the grid, if you will, as your battery or as your reserve.
Right, and I also have the capacity to recoup some of my investment. I mean, we got to figure out a way to pay for this thing that I'm putting on my roof, and so tax credit is one possibility. Another possibility is a net metering. kind of concept?
Net metering, it differs by every state. Right now, we don't have uniform net metering laws, so what exists in Maryland is very different from what we have in Virginia, which is very different from what we have in D.C.
Right.
And so it is very difficult from a business model to determine which one is the right. If we had uniform net metering, that would make a very big difference. And then you add time of use rates, which means that you're paying for the price of the real cost of the electricity. On a day like today, guarantee Pepco, as they're pulling in new demand, isn't paying 8 cents per kilowatt hour. They're probably paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour.
You know, something tells me that our friends over at Energy and Commerce would say they've got jurisdiction over that rather than us. But how about that net metering thing? So it was fun to dream about such topics. Anyhow, so how about, speaking of jurisdiction, is this a voluntary checkoff or a mandatory checkoff?
It's a mandatory checkoff program that companies then have the option of opting out of. And so it becomes voluntary after it's created.
How does that work?
You would pay into it, and then you have the opportunity to request a refund. So the way the structure works, and this is a very important part, especially as the U.S. market continues to develop, is we may be importing more and more panels from China. To avoid a free ridership, you structure the program so that everybody pays into it initially. If they decide they don't want to support the program for whatever reason, then they can opt out and get a reimbursement for the money that they paid into.
So what free rider would not go to that extra step of asking for a refund? Just a lazy free rider that doesn't realize their opportunity? Or
I think it forces them to get involved. It forces them to see the merits of a program. It forces them to either sit on the board or at least engage with the board as to what the program is all about. And at least they understand it, so they're making a conscious decision as opposed to an ignorant, I don't want to get involved decision. And there's probably peer pressure that would keep people to participate. I'm sure that exists in agriculture.
I wonder, it's this question for someone. Anybody know what this is, a sequential referral or something, or to Energy and Commerce? Do we have jurisdiction over? I don't know. It's an interesting question about whether we have jurisdiction over such a mandatory checkoff. I guess we'll ask that question of council over here or something. I don't know. or to the chair.
And Mr. Inglis, when we put this legislation together, we were obviously looking at jurisdiction. Because we had a panel that qualified, we thought it was important to come in and have a discussion about this,
right.
Because this is one of the main parts of what would be so helpful for the industry in terms of promotion. That's why we're still working on that. That will be had on the draft discussion.
Great.
Talk about that.
And a question for the panel is, which is more crucial to us, the storage question or the efficiency question, the efficiency of conversion? As I understand it, the solar cells are, I wish I knew how to explain it. Maybe Roscoe will explain it to us next. He's got the next question to explain this conversion issue and the efficiency of it. I don't know how to express it. But it seems that we're talking a lot about storage here. We're not talking much about the efficiency of the conversion.
Well, let me take a stab at that. I think it really comes down to the economics. It really comes down to how many cents per kilowatt hour am I paying life cycle for the power. When you add storage to concentrating solar power, you improve or increase the value by a tremendous amount, because as Rhone talked about earlier, you're allowing there to be essentially power generation at a time when you may in fact have peak power use, which there's a higher value on that, certainly to the utility. I know that in Spain there's a feed-in tariff as well, and they put a big premium on having storage. In other words, being able to generate electricity even past the normal sunlight hours, and by putting in the generation, the developers actually get an 80% additional return on investment by putting in the storage. So that's just in economic terms. The efficiency is important. Typically, the cost is important. So it's efficiency and a cost trade-off. So sometimes you have high efficiency, high cost. Sometimes you have low efficiency, low cost. Sometimes those are equivalent. And there is a trade-off. I think you need to go back to how many cents per kilowatt hour life cycle, all in, all out, kind of a metric to determine which one has the most attractiveness to it.
If I could jump in, there's a Congressman, there's a diversity of technologies in the solar field, which is a good characteristic of the technology space. We're going everywhere from the photovoltaics that Rhone brought the example of to concentrating solar power, which is large scale. And if I can kind of put the example out there of people are very concerned about what their price of electricity is, primarily until the lights go out, and then all of a sudden they start having a greater concern about the reliability of electricity. And so around the world, prices of electricity and reliability both vary situationally. As we start with solar today, the primary focus outside of this proposed work is on efficiency. Everyone's looking at cost. But as solar becomes more successful, just like wind has become more successful, then greater attention gets paid to the reliability. So it depends on where you are in the development. First you worry about cost, then you worry about cost plus reliability. And I think that's what's looked at here, is that we're starting to be more realistic about solar than we were a few years ago.
Yeah, Mr. Bartlett, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. There are three groups in our country that ought to have common cause in wanting to move away from fossil fuels to renewables, solar included. And I'm wondering if those three groups have locked arms, or are they now criticizing the other group's premise? One of the global warming people, and of course there is, after you've paid the carbon price of producing the solar panels, there's now no carbon emission in producing power. They're the national security people who lament the fact that we're so dependent on foreign oil, and to the extent we can use solar, we're going to use less foreign oil. And they're the peak oil people who believe that although we may muddle through the global warming and the national security, there's no muddling through peak oil. If it's not there, it's not there. And these three groups ought to have common cause. Have they locked arms, or are they still criticizing each other's premise?
I think everyone has been very busy and focused on their own respective issues, but having said that, there is a very clear unification that these three issues need to be addressed in a very similar fashion. They're not mutually exclusive. They have to be dealt with at the same time, and I would say that the groups working on global warming, national security, peak oil, and certainly solar, were engaged with all three of those groups.
Yeah, the solution to those problems are all exactly the same. Move away from fossil fuels to sustainable renewables, and of course solar is a big one of those. If you have grid tie, what is the advantage of a large centralized production rather than putting it over 1,000 home rooftops? I would think that the more widely dispersed it is, the better off it is. So why are we focusing on these big facilities out in the desert that are a long way from populations? And of course, the lot further you move these electrons over the wire, the few of them reach the other end of the wire. Unlike, you put a gallon of oil in the pipeline 1,000 miles away, you get a gallon of oil. You put electrons in a wire, and if you're far enough away, you get none of them out the other end of it. So I have trouble understanding why we're focusing on these large centralized productions rather than distributing them widely over thousands of house roofs.
Let me start. I think our infrastructure today is based on a concept of big power plants, big wires. And so a lot of it has to do with, so how do we assimilate into the infrastructure of today? There is actually a cost issue. The larger scale, and certainly in the case of concentrating solar power, one could make the case that there's actually better economics if you aggregate large scale, put this thing all centrally located. There's a value of distributed generation, which I think is to your point, that I think we probably miss and don't fully appreciate. And to a large degree, we kind of discriminate against distributed generation because it's difficult to hang those onto the grid today. We do need an intelligent grid. We need a grid that can accommodate a distributed set of generation facilities, but it's more difficult today to do that. I think ultimately we get to a point where I think distributed generation is valued at perhaps a premium, as opposed to, because it allows you lots of other flexibilities. But in today's environment, central station power is what utilities like. And when you start talking about RPSs and those things as we have in Colorado, the way you get there most quickly is large solar farms, large wind farms, and that's the kinds of things that people are looking at. I think ultimately we'll get to, I think, the broader question that you're asking, which is the value of distributed generation.
Thank you. unless you're producing more electricity this month than you use, don't you automatically have net metering? If you take the meter out and reverse it, you run it backwards. So that's why they put a seal on it, by the way, so you can't do that. Don't you automatically have net metering, whether the power company wants it or not, if you have solar panels on your roof?
No, you do not. It depends entirely on your meter. If you have your standard spinning meter, the answer is yes, you have the capability of net metering, but it is entirely dependent upon the law of that state. Each state has different net metering laws. In some cases, you might spin it backwards and they're only going to pay you wholesale electricity prices rather than retail electricity prices. In some cases, they're going to charge you a surcharge for transmission and distribution. It differs by state, every state.
I have a question. We need to standardize that, of course, but I have a question about grid tie and reliability. I have a wind machine I put up, and I find out that it's a grid tie wind machine, and it has to see 120 or it won't produce any electricity. As soon as it stops seeing 120, it stops producing electricity. Now, I understand the reason for that is you don't want to electrocute the poor lineman who's come to fix the wire because you're still pumping juice into it after it's down. But just when I need it most, it's not there. Wouldn't you think that we would be interested in some backup wherever you have solar panels on your roof? And shouldn't we have systems where you can now isolate yourself from the grid and produce some electricity for yourself with some storage on site? Just when I need it most now, it's not there.
I think you're seeing significant advancements, certainly in the private sector, also at NREL, with respect to storage technology. So your typical lead-acid batteries, your car batteries, are your best option today. I think within a couple of years, you'll see some very sophisticated storage technologies at a much lower price that allow you to do that, sir.
But even if I have the storage facility, my wind machine stops working when it doesn't see 120.
I'm afraid.
Or 240. It just quits.
I'm afraid that's a subject for another panel. This is just a solar group.
We need some way of turning that off. I understand the need for it. You don't want to be pumping electricity into the wire when the lineman thinks it's dead, so you're going to electrocute him. I understand that. But you need a way to isolate your home so you still can run your freezer and have lights and so forth when the power's off, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And there's power electronics that we're now working on to solve those kinds of problems so that it is much more user-friendly. We've not really focused on those standalone power applications as effectively as we can or should have because other things have taken priorities, but we're working on those.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bartlett. A couple of questions from Ms. Weissman and Mr. Sarubbi. In southern Arizona is now the fastest growing state in the nation, a lot of home building, and people are really interested. Obviously, they come out there to get out of the cold and the rain and the snow, and people want to take advantage of the wonderful sunlight we have. So in terms of this training, what kind of skills shortage do you predict in the future related to solar installation and maintenance with this increased demand? And can this legislation address this looming shortage? And also, if the two of you would address the question of whether or not we have communities with these training programs that have actually seen an improvement in terms of the quality of the installation of the installers of the solar panels.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think without a doubt, what we're starting with, our goal here is to have a strong market. In order to have a strong market, we need to have qualified installers. We need to make sure that consumer confidence is assured that if you pay the money that you're paying for a system that's installed properly and that you don't have to come back for service calls or for fixing the initial installation. And in order to get to that point, you need training to make sure that we have a good installer population as well as a good product to put out on the roof or in the field. We are certainly finding that those installers that go through the NABCEP certification program are demonstrating a higher level quality of installation. Now, that does not mean that people who are not NABCEP certified are not qualified. I don't want to imply that, but we are finding that having to go through the NABCEP credentialing process really takes a hard look at some of the most important issues, in part including the national familiarity with the National Electrical Code, making sure that, understanding orientation, understanding attachment to the roof, understanding wiring, understanding all the different major tasks and subtasks that are necessary to do a competent job. So that we are finding that what the NABCEP certification program is doing is not only certifying and making sure that we have qualified workers, but we're making sure that the training is set to those standards to make sure that they know what they're doing. And I think that what NABCEP has done, in addition to elevating the workforce, it has also increased the need for good training and education. And we get calls all the time, we get emails all the time, where can I get training so I can become NABCEP certified? So what we're seeing is that not only is the credential a great signal to consumers, but it's also increasing the need for better training.
Yeah, if I could add to my colleague Jane here, NYSERDA has tied their incentive package to people who are certified, NABCEP certified. So at least the homeowners who are reaping the benefits of this incentive are at least assured that they're getting it from a certified installer. So that's helping improve the standards. And as Jane mentioned, we're getting a lot of phone calls for training in Hudson Valley with the sponsorship of IREC and as well as NYSERDA are doing National Electrical Code training seminars for the electrical inspectors out there, but also building inspectors. We're doing specific training in that area to bring as many building inspectors into the fold and the type of solar systems that they're going to have to go out and approve in the community. So that in itself is helping the standards increase alone. And it's amazing. We had a website put up just a few months ago as we were getting our solar programs off the ground, and the amount of hits that we're getting on that website, showing the interest, from the community out there is tremendous. And I'm getting nervous for the amount of emails that I'm receiving on a daily basis for people who are interested in the training, either receive the training or homeowners who are interested in actually having somebody who is certified to be able to install it. So they're coming to Hudson Valley. That's where they're looking for that information because they're going out on the web. Who can I get to come and install a nice solar system on a house that I know it's going to be a credibly installed system and it's going to be, meet all the standards of industry. So we are seeing that growth.
Yeah, the chair recognizes Mr. Udall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to come and hear from the panel today. This is an area, as you all know, of great fascination, but also great potential. I also wanted to show my solidarity with, I shouldn't say Mr., but Dr. Arvizu, who heads up the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is in part located in my district in Colorado. This is such an exciting time for us, I think, as a country and as a broad industry. In Colorado, we recently passed Amendment 37, which put an RPS in place for the state of Colorado. And I took advantage of that opportunity. I now have a 3.5 kilowatt system on my roof. It's fun to make electricity and at the right time of day to go out and see the meter running backwards and knowing that you're not only reducing your own bill, but you're putting some power back on the grid. So I want to thank the chairwoman for holding this really, really important hearing and giving us an opportunity as members of Congress not only learn more about what the potential is, but also what we can do to help provide greater incentives. And having arrived late, I don't know all of the questions that have been asked, but I'm curious, given the great team that came to install the system on my home, what sorts of stories that the panelists heard, both positive and in some cases negative, about workers without training attempting to install solar panels. I don't know who'd be best to speak to that question, but Ms. Weissman?
Thank you, Congressman. Well, there are always the stories to tell, and I think that where we're finding the problems, where we're seeing the problems, when shading's a big issue. Certainly in some parts of the country, with the trees, a small tree today could be a big tree tomorrow, and so we're seeing that those installers who are not properly trained are not, realizing that shading is a real issue. And if they don't see the tree and the leaves, and even the trees in the winter when there are no leaves in certain parts of the country, that this will be a problem. Most states do require that a licensed electrician do the final hookup of the system, and we think that's great, and that's how it should be. But what we're also finding is that different trades who know their trade very well may not know solar very well. And so certainly training is very important on the actual, the characteristics of solar and the technology and what's needed to put up a good system. So what we're finding, and what we're seeing now too with more incentives going on both at the state level and the federal level, is what we want to prevent is any guy or gal with a truck and a ladder to think they can put this stuff up on the roof. That's not true. That's, it's going to be a problem. So that even those people that feel that they're doing a good job may in fact not be. And it was interesting when we started NABCEP, the certification program, we had a lot of the old timers say, I'm not going to take a test. I know what I've been doing. I've been doing this for 20 years. Grandfather me in. And we said, absolutely not. We're not going to give you a seal of approval. If you know what you're doing, you're going to pass this 4-hour exam, and that, that will show proof that we can give you the certification mark. So we're pretty serious in terms of making sure that if we're going to certify somebody, they know what they're doing, and prevent some of the stories that we've heard, that we've seen, some of the mistakes that have been made, some of the stupid mistakes that have been made out in the field. What we want to make sure is customers are going to get, a well-run system that's going to last a long time.
And just to add one other comment, the IBEW has done, I think, an excellent job in training in certain key markets, but starting to go national, training their members to certify and install solar systems in an appropriate manner. So I think that when you start to see that shift, where you have large trade unions, where you have large roofer groups starting to reach out and train and educate, and if you will, give them new skill sets. I think that is a fundamental sea change in the capability of installers going forward. Certainly linking with Jane's program at NABCEP is absolutely critical as well.
But if I can just add on to Mr. Resch's comment, the IBEW and the NJATC do sit on the board of directors of the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, so we've been very involved with the union from day one. In addition, the NJATC, the training arm for the IBEW, just published a fantastic textbook on photovoltaic systems, which I know that Joe and a lot of the community colleges are beginning to use as their main learning tool.
I see my time's expired, but the chairman would indulge me for 30 more seconds. Speaking to your comment about shading, not only with leaves on trees, but the tree branches themselves, that was one of the processes we had to go through. We had a big old cottonwood tree that was blocking at certain times of the day the system. And I found out that in the process of installing the system that if you have any shading on any part of the system, it affects the overall system in very dramatic ways. So we had to make the decision, it was almost like letting go of your firstborn child, taking down this tree, but I was convinced that taking down the tree was worth the pain because of the benefits that you accrue. And I was told that taking down the tree, but at the same time installing the system, was the equivalent of planting 100 more trees. So I hope that sales job is accurate, but this was a learning process for my family and myself. So again, I thank the chairwoman for her indulgence and for holding this very, very important hearing, one that these technologies are what our economic future will involve. It's also about energy security and about environmental benefits. So this is very, very important. Thank you.
Oh, please.
Could I add? Could I use some of those comments, Madam Chairman? Several comments have been made, including yours just now, which I'd like to kind of provide a understanding, though, that the issues that we're running into about the shading, the tree, distributed, point up that there's need for more than one piece of the solar solution, and the distributed solution that has a lot of public popularity has its limits that are important for us to overcome to get a large percentage of our energy to come from solar. And for example, we have our solar test site in Tempe, Arizona, and I can tell you that the college students that live in the condos and the urban area, they do not have the option of having solar on their roof. I live in Tempe, and even though I'm work on solar, my solar panels are with APS's site up in Prescott, Arizona, and the reason is, as an engineer, I know that they're far more productive than they would be on my roof. And that's important to me. If I'm going to see a lot of our resources put into a very important solar panel and also find storage options, I don't want to see them wasted in an imperfect application. So to address some of the points made, there's about 85% of the energy that comes from a Four Corners power plant makes it to the customer in Phoenix. A high fraction of that energy goes over the wires. The wires are very good at delivering energy. So even though we do see the value of rooftop solar, it certainly won't get us to the 40% type number that solar, I think, could get if we're allowed to build larger facilities that are more efficient, bring the power in where it's needed, and secondly, to bring in the storage technologies that would allow the utility to help provide that backup power that otherwise these panels can't do on their own. So it underscores, I think, what one of the values is of this discussion is that it's not a one solution fits all. If we want the mainstream American to use solar, we've got to make it easy. We can't just make it for us environmentally motivated folks to be the only ones using solar. Thank you.
Following up on that, if the efficiency of the conversion, though, were higher, it would make the distributed more attractive, right?
No, not at all. The efficiency is a good parameter, but the fluctuation is the issue that talks about reliability. In fact, when we built a project of any size, we have to look at the reliability on customers. The congressman talked about the wind system tripping. That also affects things like your power electronics, manufacturing businesses, power quality. So if you do have an efficient system, that's good for its economics, but there will be interruptions from clouds, there will be interruptions from other reasons, and we have to match the load.
Right, which brings to the other question, which is about the storage issue, which, from what I've been hearing this morning, is crucial. It seems that the sections of the bill dealing with that are relatively brief. Is there something else we should be saying in those sections about storage besides what we're saying here?
We discussed that before we provided testimony on that very subject, because we see more than just the thermal being possible storage solutions. The thermal is worth mentioning because in the case of certain technologies, thermal is very directly used. But there's other proven large-scale solar technology for storage technologies such as compressed air energy storage, other things that while we're all waiting and working on the new batteries, there's things that can be done sort of on a regional basis.
I suppose those battery breakthroughs really could also be there are a number of things that if they broke could make it so that if we had the breakthroughs in a number of areas, you'd have wide-scale, more use of the resource, right?
Yeah, there's no question about that. Storage has continued, as I call it, to be the Achilles heel of renewable energy in general. If we just had a better storage system, we've been working on batteries for a really long time, literally, decades. And progress is slow. We're making progress, but progress is slow. And I think ultimately, converting wind and the other intermittent type of resources to some sort of an energy carrier like hydrogen or compressed air, whatever it might be, is really going to change the economic equation considerably. I know I sit on the National Science Board, and we're doing things for actually trying to provide power at the South Pole while we're doing some fairly energy-intensive experiments. And we're looking for standalone systems that are not polluting, because right now we're polluting in the southern hemisphere because of all of the diesel fuel that we're using down there. And we're looking for some of these advanced concepts that down there you pay an exorbitant amount of money for that particular application. And there are some things we're looking at. How can you convert wind energy to hydrogen and to use it when it doesn't blow, or solar energy to hydrogen, or a variety of other technologies and things. And I think ultimately you need to look at that whole systems architecture. So you need to look at them in the broadest context. I'm very bullish on the fact of zero energy buildings. We use more energy in buildings than in most any other application that we have. And so the distributed value on a building that is efficiently designed with its own power generation source and its own storage has great value and benefit. At the systems level, it's still a little bit costly, although we're making huge progress in that. And we've got examples of Habitat for Humanity homes that generate more energy than they consume. And so it can be done on a modest building. And it is a matter of changing a variety of things. It's what we talked about earlier, putting the price signal where the decisions are being made. Construction for buildings is not incentivized to save energy. And so all those things need to be part of the package, and I think we need to look more holistically at the whole issue.
To the objection that I hear when I talk about hydrogen, about why convert, well, just out of curiosity, it's not exactly the subject of this hearing, but why convert to hydrogen in those cases you were just talking about, particularly at the polls where Dr. Bartlett and I saw the same thing you're talking about, diesel fuel being brought in, belching out the smokestacks when we got a lot of wind, an awful lot of wind and a lot of solar there, when we're really using this center.
Yeah, the why convert part is because it really is an elegant solution. You don't pollute anything. Obviously, you convert, you change water to hydrogen and oxygen, and then you use the energy and it converts back to water. It's very costly at this point, and that's the reason that we don't do it more uniformly elsewhere. But in particular environment, the cost that you pay for the energy of transporting fossil fuel down there is exorbitant, and there's just no reason why you wouldn't, in terms of economics, do the thing that is less environmentally insulting than the other thing. So,
yeah, helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you. Mr. Resch, as in some other fields, global warming, for instance, everybody talks about the cost and the fears and the projections and the predictions and all, but most of those people that are recommending that we just go all out on global warming fail to talk about cost. They shy away from that. They don't want to talk about who has to go by the cash register. And at a time when China's polluting on an increasing ratio with coal. So I'll ask you something about, how about the industry? Has anyone expressed any concern about paying the assessment? And will this result in an increased cost to the consumer? I don't see how it can keep from it, but you'd have to answer that. And how much would the assessment be? And how's it going to be done, case-by-case basis or individually? Or
Thank you for your question. And with respect to the Checkoff Program, I think there is initially concern about what's the right way to structure it. Where do you assess within the solar stream? How far upstream, how far downstream? Do you assess at the installer? Do you assess at the manufacturer? Should it include all equipment? Should it just include PV modules? What about solar water heating? There's a lot of questions, and I think good questions that need to be resolved. And I think the way this program is structured is it has flexibility. That all the rules are not set in stone, that there is an opportunity to adjust the rate or determine an appropriate rate that would actually produce an appropriate amount of money that, first the industry is willing to spend and raise, and that it doesn't penalize the consumer or penalize the manufacturer to the greatest extent. So, I would say we don't have all the answers, but part of that is the discussion with the Department of Energy and getting the board together to determine what is the right level and just make sure all the right players are involved. We have a couple of suggestions in our written testimony for improvements to the program, and I think what you'll find is that all of the manufacturers will agree that's what's needed to campaign along these lines. They may disagree on timing, when that program should be put in place, but all of them want to participate and make sure they have a voice in the development of that program.
Well, we've got airliners that all except Southwest are going broke, flying full and going broke because of fuel, and they have to turn to the consumer. Even right here in Washington, in the city of Washington, the cab drivers, I think at midnight last night, increased their minimum fee to $250 instead of $150. That's gone up almost 50%. How are we going to keep from the assessment going to the consumer? Why wouldn't it?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. One of which is that as there's more competition, there's a lot more pressure on the price downward. And when you look at the oil and gas industry, other than propane, they shy away from any kind of structure along these lines because it actually goes back to the producer. Mm-hmm. That the costs are passed back to the producer, not onto the consumer, because the consumer is only willing to spend so much. And what we've really seen in the solar industry in the last couple of years is increased competition. Increased competition to put cheaper panels. They're scaling up manufacturing. Prices are coming down. Feedstock materials are starting to increase in supply, and so again, putting downward pressure on the price. It's unclear. I mean, I think if you were to step back with an economist, you'd have two economists. One of them would say it's going to be passed on the consumer. The other would say that the manufacturers will absorb the cost. But I think what we're looking for is a level of assessment that's small enough so that it's not a major hit on either side, the manufacturer side or the installer side, but yet collectively, as this industry grows, we can use those resources to educate the public on the benefits of solar energy.
To be continued.
To be continued, absolutely.
Let me ask the panel, if I have some more time here. The language of the bill provides for criminal penalties, excuse me, for release of information obtained under the authority of the Act to, quote, any agency or officer of the United States for any purpose other than implementation of this Act, unquote. What information do you think they're seeking to protect here? What's being protected, and do you agree that criminal penalties are necessary?
Well, I think a lot of it is confidential business information, and I think that part of that provision you're referring to goes back to the we need you to open your books in order for us to make sure that what you're reporting to us is accurate if you're participating in this program, and that if that information leaks out, and a lot of it is CBI, that you would want to make sure that companies are comfortable with the government looking into their books with respect to confidential business information. If I'm referring to the section of the bill that you are as well.
Yeah, it's a mandatory program.
It is a mandatory program that companies can opt out of.
And it's pretty strong language. Any agency or officer that provides for criminal penalties. That's pretty strong. Do you agree that criminal penalties are necessary?
I think that
you may not have an opinion on it. I'm not trying to.
This program is modeled after the existing agriculture programs, and what I would say is certainly we can discuss the right way to ensure compliance, and maybe that is an overly aggressive way, and maybe it works in agriculture. We shouldn't be doing it in energy, but I would say this is modeled after existing programs. So. It seems to have worked previously, but certainly there's opportunities to modify it if necessary.
My time's up. There's a lot more we'd discuss, but I can do that with you by letter. I thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And Mr. Resch, just to clarify, how many other programs are out there that we're looking at? I know we talked about milk and we talked about beef.
Yeah, there are 17 programs right now between energy and agriculture that are promotion programs along these lines.
And have we had a problem with companies and confidentiality and issues like this in the past that we know of?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't have specific examples. I imagine that they're consistently written in the same manner in order to address concerns that have been raised in the past, but I'm not entirely sure.
Right, Mr. Hall, we'll get back to you on that because I'm curious as well. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to note that if there were an unending succession of ANWRs, and we were willing to pay the price for sequestering the CO2, we wouldn't need to be talking about solar, would we? But the reality is that they're not an unending succession of ANWRs. I have 10 kids, 15 grandkids, and 2 great-grandkids, and wouldn't it be nice if I left them a little energy for their future? Which is one of the reasons I won't vote to drill an ANWR until they commit to me they're going to use all the energy from ANWR to invest in alternatives, because today we have no surplus energy to invest in alternatives, or oil wouldn't be $69 a barrel, right? I'd also like to note that unless you are making hydrogen from a fossil fuel. Using hydrogen probably results in a larger carbon footprint than not using it, unless you're going to use it in a fuel cell, which we don't yet have, because you will always get less energy from the hydrogen than you get from the energy source from which you produced it. And if that's a fossil fuel, obviously burning hydrogen in a reciprocating engine is going to leave a larger carbon footprint than if you had to use the original fuel. Just noting how we're creatures of habit. I was to the South Pole twice in the last 5 years. For 6 months, the sun shines all day, every day, and the wind never stops blowing, and we create essentially all of our power there from flown-in diesel. Now, is that dumb?
Yes.
But we are really creatures of habit, aren't we? You know, the sun is 93 million miles away. I have a place in West Virginia. My friends are amazed that I make ice from the sun. I have a Sunfrost refrigerator hooked up. But I put my first solar panels on the roof. I have 153 acres. I say, why in the devil are you doing that? You know, the sun is 93 million miles away. If I put it on the roof or on the ground beside the building, it makes no difference as far as the sun is concerned. It's very much cheaper and easier to put it down on the ground. So unless you're in a subdivision, you've got to put it on your roof, don't put it on your roof. It's a whole lot easier to do maintain on the ground. A big part of the cost of putting in these solar panels is just the carpentry or whatever you want to call it to mount these things. And you don't need to have some guy do that. You know, the Home Depot has a great slogan, you can do it, we can help. We need to be telling these people how to mount it. I don't have any problem with a certified electrician hooking up the power from it, but wiring them and hooking it up is a very small part of the cost of putting them in. And you don't need to have somebody come put it in. If you can change a faucet washer, you can install solar panels. It really isn't that tough. So I would just encourage you, we don't need to further increase the cost of putting these in. You can do it, we can help, and we need some help out there, like, you know, you don't put it where it's going to be shaded and so forth. Let me ask you a question about storage. Isn't it true that for these large facilities, it's hard to beat the battery that never fails, which is unless you have to replace the pump or the turbine? Why don't we just pump water uphill and then let it flow back when we need the energy? Isn't that about as good a battery as we can get? With about as high efficiency as any battery we've got?
Simple answer, yes.
Yes. Well, whether topography permits it, why shouldn't we be doing that everywhere?
Well, everywhere, including desert climates where water Arizona is an example where it's done today on hydro plants that exist. Creating a new hydro plant just for that purpose would require a high reservoir, a low reservoir,
that's true,
water, et cetera. So those are the practical issues. I do recognize pumped hydro as being a very excellent, efficient solution when you can do it. Compressed air is another one that we're looking at because it has similar favorable attributes, different implementation. But in terms of Arizona as an example, most of the lakes, water flows downhill. So there are those places where it's been done, Roosevelt Lake and others, I believe. But I think that in terms of creating new lakes just for that purpose, that would be quite a challenge on the water side.
But there are a lot of places where the topography and the water available is there, and we really ought to be exploiting that.
If I may, I know that those discussions have been taken to the dam operators, and they've had challenges in terms of their most economical operation of that asset. So you would have to take that question to some of the existing dam operators.
I'd just like to note that if you don't have electricity, the thing you miss the most is lights. And it's very easy, and I would encourage, I would hope that we would encourage people, if they're putting in a standalone system, that they use direct current lights. You don't need an inverter. It's really simple. You have a solar panel, and you have lights, and if they're direct current, they work. And there's really nothing to fail there, is there? So it's the first thing you miss in your home when the electricity goes off, right? The lights go off. And if you're looking at those things that makes life comfortable, you know, being able to see and have lights is very essential. And that is pretty much a fail-safe system if you have direct current DC. If you have 120 volts, you've got that really complicated inverter full of all. I don't trust computers and these little things. They may or may not work. You know? The lead acid battery works all the time, doesn't it? And you don't need anything in between the battery and your 12 volt or 24 volt or 48 volt ballast on your on your fluorescent lights, do you? It's a very efficient use of electricity and very fail-safe, and I think our people ought to be encouraged to put those in, enough so you can see your way around the house when the lights go out, right? Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for a good hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. We don't have a tremendous amount of time left, and I'd like the panel to focus a few minutes on this issue of water. And Mr. Hayden, perhaps Dr. Arvizu as well. Obviously out west we do have some real issues in terms of just not having the water. We've got 25 million users on the Colorado River right now. We're in a drought. We've got, increased demands of, the current water supply that we do have. So I'm interested in terms of the requirements for a CSP plant. Can they be built to use air cooling instead of water cooling, able to eliminate the water requirements? And are water constraints an obstacle to the wider adoption, in your opinion, of CSP technologies?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, water is an issue. It's one of those issues that is on the sequence of working through the biggest challenge of cost just to get us started, which fortunately in my years of working this, I see a lot of progress right now. So I'm happy to hear that we're starting to look at the water, meaning that we're serious about this moving forward. And it is absolutely an issue. The present-day CSP systems use water for cooling to about the extent that a conventional power plant does. And therefore, it's acceptable in some views, but we would like to do better. Obviously, a lot of farmland is getting converted for residential, largely because of water. So the water situation is not static. It is becoming more of a pressure. So in every sense, if we want to use more of this energy technology, reducing the water use is important. In terms of the present-day designs, there is something called air cooling, where they replace the water evaporation cycle with fans and just move the air through a radiator-type structure. That can be done today, but it wasn't the economical solution for the present-day installations. It is available today, but we would like our cake and eat it too. We would like it to be available and also more efficient and less costly. Secondly, I'll mention that other concentrating solar power technologies, including concentrating photovoltaics, dish engine technologies, don't use water cooling at all. So when we, again, talk about CSP, usually we're talking about the trough technology with water cooling, but there are other technology solutions that will compete with the trough, and so trough needs to try to move itself forward with water reduction. At the same time, these other technologies might come forward and be low water use technologies. Mm-hmm. It's that in fact, we've sometimes noticed how little water is valued on a dollar basis, and yet how much it's valued on an emotional basis. And that sort of contradiction is what we're grappling here with on its application with solar.
Mm-hmm. If I could add just a little bit on that, absolutely. I think we've been looking at technologies that really don't use, any water that's not self-contained in the system, for a long time. I can remember in the 80s, we looked at a variety of gas-cooled reactors. We have actually the best heat transfer medium for these concentrating thermal systems is typically a molten salt or something that's got a very high specific heat to it. So you don't have really a contained even water need for the actual working end of those particular plants. And there are ways to get around having to use any water if you really chose to do that, but it is a matter of economics. It's a matter of pushing the technology and making it essentially more cost effective. And there is, in fact, as Mr. Hayden says, this whole idea that you can put concentrating photovoltaics. The biggest problem with these concentrating systems, as I mentioned in my testimony, is the upfront capital cost. And one of the things that we're looking at is how can you reduce that cost dramatically. And some of these concentrating linear Fresnel lens troughs, in fact, are some things that are being pioneered right now in Australia that are, I think, very cost effective and also can be done in a manner that is very, very miserly relative to the water use. So this is not a problem that I believe is in any way a showstopper or couldn't be overcome, but for the will and the R&D program that goes along with trying to stand up with some pilots to make sure that it operates the way we think it ought to.
Further questions, because I know we're running out of time. First of all, APS, Mr. Hayden, I understood took 14 years to construct the solar trough. 14 years, I think. Why was the hiatus so long, and is that something that we can learn from as well?
Well, the proper way to look at that 14 years is no one had done it in 14 years, and we chose to pursue that. And I'll give you a pragmatic answer. I've been going to DOE meetings for all my career and having the solar industry run up and say, we buy a 100-megawatt power plant and everything will be fine. Now, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars when they do that, and we, under a regulated structure, do not have the opportunity to just spend hundreds of millions of dollars that is not least cost. So what we chose to do was to challenge those solar companies to make a small-scale plant just to prove that they could get on their feet again. Because the present regime of folks making the trough is not the same folks that built it the decades ago, and they were actually needed to give a new start. So literally, when they built our first megawatt, it was all of a sudden kind of a deer in the headlights moment when, oh, you mean we really have to build this thing? And they had fundamental decisions, such as were they going to use aluminum or were they going to use steel? Who were they going to get their tubes from? So fortunately, even though our 1 megawatt is a very small project, it gave them the opportunity to start getting it together, and then when they had the 64 megawatt opportunity in Nevada, they had momentum. All I can say that we did was we broke the ice. We didn't have the dollar available under a regulated structure to buy hundreds of megawatts, but we did have the dollars available to break the ice.
Before I turn it to Mr. Inglis, just Mr. Resch, if you could address Mr. Bartlett's comments about, and I know he had to leave, about and just anyone being able to kind of put on these solar panels. And I mean, I'm not an expert, but what I've seen is it's pretty complicated stuff.
There's 2 points I'll make there. First is that Home Depot does sell solar panels in New Jersey and in California, and if you wanted to go out and buy a solar system, you could do it. So you had a little garden shed, you want to put lights up in the back, very simple, something you could do. Now, you're dealing with electricity, right? So you got to be smart about it, and so you don't want anybody, you don't want your kids running out there and playing around with it. I mean, it is electricity. But when you really do step back and understand electricity, it's fairly understandable. Now, he was referring to a district current, a DC, versus what we actually use in our homes, which is alternating current. So it gets a little bit more complicated. You have more equipment. I decided to use a contractor to install the solar system on my house because I don't want to climb up on a roof, first of all. Second of all, I don't really understand electricity all that well in the sense of how I install it in my home. And just like anything else, I went out and I got 3 bids. And so when Congressman Udall was talking about shading and all the rest, well, there's a little bit of the buyer beware. You want to get 3 bids, and then just like you would for any system, you install an air conditioning system in your house, a hot water heater, you're going to get a couple of bids and then find out which one's the best and which one seems the most knowledgeable. So I would tend to say that we're not quite there with the technology to say it's plug and play, so that any consumer could go out and just quickly install it on their house with respect to photovoltaics. I think we will get there at some point in time. We're not there yet.
Can I just add to that? Teaching electricity my entire career and former electrician, I would be a little nervous to know that homeowners were going to go out on a regular basis and install systems. When we talk about grounding needs, when we start talking about liability, because the first time there's a fire at somebody's house, the thing you hear most often is that it came from electricity. It was an electrical problem. So we certainly don't want to create that environment with the solar industry where people are going to Home Depot. Not that they can't buy that small type of system, but if I'm going to be put in a 3 kW, 7 or even 10 kW system on my house, I want to know that it's installed by a certified, company, that I've got longevity with that system. And so I'd be a little leery about moving in that direction at this point in the industry. And the DC in reference to AC, the inverters today are so much more efficient and reliable, you know, that I don't see the conversion of moving to DC, you know, in our house, direct current power, and retrofitting all our lights for that, you know, environment, and as opposed to staying with alternating current, just doesn't make sense at this point.
Just one quick follow-up. We were talking earlier about the reporting requirements and the disclosure of information. And anybody want to make any further comments about that? Particularly Dr. Is there something about the disclosure of information that was of concern in previous programs, these 17 programs?
I'm not exactly sure what the major issues were. We are aware of some lawsuits that have been brought against the U.S. Department of Agriculture based on those programs. It kind of highlights the fact that there is a liability issue or risk that comes along with monitoring or administering one of these programs. And I don't have the details of that, but I would suggest that there is a lot more to explore regarding what assumption of liabilities there are in administering the program.
Gotcha. I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Before bringing this hearing to a close, I just want to thank all of our panelists, and I really want to thank the time and the effort that went into preparing for your testimony today and for helping to craft this legislation. I also want to thank the other members for being here and asking some great questions. I learned a lot, and I hope that members did, and the general public as well. The record will remain open for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions the subcommittee may ask of witnesses. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.